In 2013, Kat Bonner lost her mom in a tragic car accident. She figured out how to manage her grief and is helping other women do the same. On this podcast, you'll hear from other women who have lost their moms and discover the exact coping strategies you need to get through the day and be in the best place you've ever been. Don't miss another episode. Subscribe today. More information can be found at katbonner.com/podcast. And if you'd like to join a group of like-minded women, head to Facebook and search for the Life After Losing Mom community. Lastly, if you're looking for help managing your grief, book a complimentary connection call at katbonner.com.
So before we get started with the episode, I just want to share something with you. I'm sure you've heard multiple times that grief is an individual process. Well, the people you heard this from aren't wrong, because it very much so is. You're probably wondering, how can someone help me when they grieve differently than I do? That's why I'm so passionate about one-on-one coaching that is totally customized to you and your pain points. I let you guide me to ways I can help you. I can only take on 3 clients at a time, so the spots are limited. I'd love for you to tell me how I can help you in your grief journey.
I was 15 when my mom passed away. She was in a quadding accident. So we lived in a little small village, about a half an hour away from a larger city. And her parents lived on an acreage just outside of that village. And we'd always just ride our quads out to the acreage and then ride them home. Well, we were all at school one day and my mom was going about her regular day. And she was riding her quad home from my grandparents' house, and she lost control of the quad and ran into a power pole. And then by the time emergency services arrived, she was in stable condition, but she ended up going into cardiac arrest on the way to the hospital. So she didn't end up making it. They couldn't revive her. So I remember it like it was yesterday. I was in school in the town, half an hour away, and I got a text from my uncle saying that he was going to pick me up. And I thought it was really weird because I always just would ride the bus home. So I was like, okay. So he picked me up and my brother was there. And I think my sister was there too. I can't really remember, but he said that my mom was in an accident and that we had to go to the hospital. So I was like, oh no, like this isn't good. Is she okay? And he didn't really answer. So my dad was actually about 3 hours away working at the time. So he ended up having a police escort to the town to meet us at the hospital. So we were waiting at the hospital with my grandma and my uncle. And my dad arrived, and then they told us that she didn't make it, that she had gotten into a quadding accident and that she had died. So at this point I was 15, my brother was 10, I think, and my sister was 19, I believe, 19 or 20. And we were asked if we wanted to see her and say goodbye. And at the time I was 15. So I was like, no, I don't want to see my dead mom. So I opted out, which now looking back on it being almost 11 years this year, I really should have said yes, because I feel like that would have provided a little bit more closure, because it still just kind of doesn't seem like it's real. Like it's like she isn't just gonna, walk in and be like, hey, sorry, I missed the past 10 years. But it really doesn't. And it was definitely the hardest thing I've ever gone through, especially for being 15. I remember waking up the next morning because my mom wasn't there, and I made everybody breakfast. And from then on, I just kind of had to take care of them, my brother especially. And because my sister was so old, she wasn't even at home. So it was my dad and it was me and my little brother. And it was, I don't even know how to explain it. It was so unexpected. And I honestly never really grieved, I guess, because now, like 10 coming on 11 years later, I still know that I just suppressed it. I didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot. Sorry, this is just my first thought. So this is what's coming to my head, and then I'll get back to your story a little bit. But I feel like just people who lose their mom when they're younger, I mean, I guess to some people, 15 might be old, but I consider that younger. So in their really like pivotal years that they like really repress their grief and bottle it up. And then they really start to grieve years and years later. And that might not even be intentional, which is crazy because you're like, oh my God, like how did I actually put this off for so long? And then there's another thing to grieve on top of actually grieving the loss. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, what the heck? Like, this makes no sense. So, well, for starters, I want to say I'm so sorry for your loss. I know that everybody literally probably always tells you that, but sometimes I just feel like I'm compelled to say it.
Yeah. It's all right. Thanks.
It's interesting to me though that you kind of took over the motherly role when, I mean, I could understand like for your brother, but your dad was there. So can you tell me a little bit more about the dynamic? Like, were y'all not close? You know, was he really like struggling in his grief? Like, what made you feel like, or did you, you know, feel like you had to be more of a caretaker, even though he was there?
Yeah. So it was only for a little while because, and I have to be careful what I say just because I don't want to hurt my father's feelings because I know he's going to want to listen to this, but he definitely, it was really hard. He lost his wife and the mother of his children. So he was definitely going through a really hard time. He ended up losing his job because of it. And I just felt like I should help with some of the stuff because he never really was alone. He was with my mother since he was like 19. And it was, I don't know, I guess I just felt like I should help my brother and my dad deal with that. It wasn't for very long. It was only about a month or two. And then my dad rekindled a relationship with his ex, who he had a kid with just before he got together with my mom. And she ended up moving in with her son because of their personal issues with her ex-husband. And that really kind of affected me. I just kind of from there just shut down, I guess, and kind of closed everybody out and just kind of started moving on with my own life. Because it was so sudden, like, and I know that he needed to move on and whatever, and I don't blame him, but I know that it was really hard for us as kids to have our mom pass away and then just a few months later have some other woman move in and try to take care of us, I guess.
Oh, bless your heart. Yeah, there's always so many feelings that, you know, come along with grief. And I think that's one of the hardest things to process. It's like, how can you feel so many things at one time? And it really just goes to show that, like, you just have to, like, literally allow yourself to feel how you're feeling, because that's the only way that you're going to get through those feelings and the only way that you're going to be able to process them. But I am curious, do you maybe, and I hear this a lot from women just because I think it's because they're a woman, but do you think that you maybe took on the motherly role because, like, you're a female?
I guess it's mostly just because I am such an empath myself. I just knew how they felt, and I wanted to try to make them feel better, I guess. And I guess that could be because I'm a woman.
You probably never really thought about it.
No.
That's so funny. Yeah. Well, sometimes it just depends on people's personality, which is definitely a great asset to have. Bless your heart. I hope it didn't make things harder on yourself. So I guess growing up, like, were you and your mom, I mean, obviously you have a different relationship with your mom than you have with your dad, but were you more of like a mama's girl or a daddy's girl?
No, I was definitely more of a daddy's girl. And I still kind of am to this day. My mom had really, really, really bad depression. So she oftentimes didn't get out of bed, and we had to make our own lunches for school because my dad was away working, and we didn't like super have a close relationship, I guess. It's honestly like I have a really hard time remembering anything from my childhood. And I think it's just like PTSD from the accident and kind of how I just dealt with everything. I just pushed it all away. And for some reason, I just can't remember a lot of it. I know that I think that I pretty much was just a daddy's girl, and my brother was like a mama's boy, and my sister was kind of like a mama's girl too. But I honestly, like, I just don't remember much about my childhood.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I feel like you ask your parents, and then you don't have your parents, and you're like, oh, well, there goes that.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because, you know, even if you're a daddy's girl or a mama's girl or whatever, I mean, just like there's something special about a father-daughter relationship. Like there's just some things that you can't go to your dad to. And I think that's why like it's so different and it's so hard being a woman losing your mom, because it's like you literally lost the person who raised you, but she is like your same like sex. Like she like literally has like your same composition, and you don't like, you know, maybe have to feel like you explain yourself, you know, or that sort of thing that women might feel like with men. I don't know. At this point, I'm probably like rambling. But when, I guess, after your mom's passing, did you realize that like, hey, this is permanent? Like, you know, I don't have my mom here to share like my life with anymore. Like, was it immediate?
Yeah, I guess it really was. And I just cried and cried and cried forever, because like the things that I do remember, with my mom, it was just like these flashes where it's like, well, now your mom's not going to be at your graduation, and your mom's not going to be at your wedding, and your mom's not going to be there when you have your own kids to even ask questions to, like, in order to be like, Mom, my baby has a fever, what do I do? Things like that. Like I never, as soon as she passed away, it's like all those things came into my head. Like, you know, you don't have anybody to ask.
Yeah, exactly. You don't realize that until they're not there, and you're like, well, shit, there goes that. And
yeah, exactly.
I mean, no matter what, you cannot prepare yourself for this loss. But I think when the loss is unexpected, it's literally a ginormous slap in the face. And you're like, I can't attest to like having an unexpected loss because my mom's passing was also unexpected. But just based on like my knowledge, it's like, okay, like this was so unexpected. And like, especially being so young, I mean, you can't really prepare like, oh, like if I knew my mom was sick, me personally, like I would have thought about who am I going to go to when I'm going to need my mom for things, just almost preparing in advance for that. Like, no, you can't prepare your emotions, but you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. To mentally prepare yourself.
Yeah.
And to be able to also just let your parent know that you know, you love them before it happens. Like when my mom passed away, we weren't really affectionate. Like, yeah, we'd hug and stuff like that, but we never really told each other that we loved them. So I don't even remember what the last thing I said to my mom was. Whereas if my dad were to pass away, I'd know, or like even my siblings, I'd know that the last thing I said to them was, I love you, because every time we talk now, we always end our conversation saying that we love each other.
Exactly. And I mean, you just kind of realize that because you've been through this loss, which is unfortunate. But I mean, that's just, you know, kind of how it works. And it's so interesting. Like sometimes I talk to some people and they're like, oh, I didn't reach out to any other woman for anything. You know, when my mom died, like they didn't reach out to their mom's friend or their aunt or anything like that. So did you find yourself, you know, doing that or longing for another mother figure?
The only really person I kind of reached out to was my dad's mom, my grandma. She was like, so growing up, essentially each kid had their own set of grandparents that they would hang out with, I guess, in the summer. So my sister went to my mom's parents, and I went to my dad's mom's, and my brother went to my dad's dad's. So since my mom had passed away, I always would call my grandma. She was a nurse anyways, a registered nurse. And so I would usually just call her if I had any like medical questions, even just to like hang out. And I ended up living with her for a little while too when I moved out of my dad's house. And she was kind of like, I guess, the mother figure per se in my life, because I was so mad at my dad. I didn't even want to have a relationship with his girlfriend. And I had like a civil relationship, but it's just like I took it so personally that she was around. And even to this day, like, I don't know. I guess it's because I felt like it was forced on me and I didn't want it at all. I didn't want it to be forced on me. So I just didn't really give it a chance.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you realize that, like, wow, I don't really get angry. And then like your mom dies and you're like, holy shit, I'm like angrier than I've ever been in my entire life. And It's a really, really strange phenomenon, especially, I mean, people cry, but I feel like anger especially is one of those emotions that in women, especially, it's so frowned upon. And you're like, oh, like it's just, I mean, it's fascinating, but it's very different to process. I am curious, do you think that your like relationship and your interactions with your grandma on your dad's side made the void worse from your mom or from not having your mom?
I don't know. I guess there was quite a few years there where I just didn't really reach out to anybody, I guess. But because I went through like extreme depression myself, I tried to kill myself. I ended up in the hospital for a while to get like my antidepressants regulated and all this stuff. So I think like during that time between like 16 and 18, I just kind of shut everybody out. And I was like just a typical teenager that just missed my mom. And I just kind of thought that not having anybody was better than trying to fill the void.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because I'm sure that thought has gone through many of folks' heads. I don't know if I said that right, but many of people's heads, there we go, at some point. And it's definitely a lot to think about, because it's like, you know, when you reflect on your decisions, is this choice making my grief worse? Or, you know, is it making my grief better? But do you think that like it was almost part of you coping, like with not having your mom to share your life with? Like, was that a way that you cope with it by spending time with your grandma?
Yeah, it was really nice to, because we would like talk about my mom, and she would share stories of things that I might have forgotten, and it was like I always had like a really nice relationship with her. So it was good to have like some sort of stability, I guess, when that all went down. 'Cause she was able to be like a constant that wasn't changing, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. It's like, okay, well, at least you don't expect it to change. Like, you're not sick, like, as far as I know, yeah, obviously unexpected things can happen, but you had that thought in your head, like, okay, this is this, and this is not going to change, hopefully, for X amount of time. And I, at least, and let me know if you do too, found it comforting to really have people who knew my mom to help me. And I mean, family is nice, but that's not like direct family, it's an in-law. So there might be certain things that she didn't, like, that she knew about your mom that other people didn't. So, like, did she like tell you? I mean, well, you said that she told you stories, but were they like stories that you expected, or yeah, tell me a little bit more about that.
I think like she didn't necessarily have a lot of friends per se, because we did live in such a small village and she didn't drive. So a lot of the time she kind of relied on other people, to like her mother-in-law and my grandma, to kind of do things with her in a sense. So the stories that she would tell would just be like mostly about like family gatherings or things like that. Usually things that I was around, but I didn't necessarily like realize because it was in the background or something like that. So it wasn't anything that I really wasn't aware of. But she, yeah, I don't know. It was mostly just things, I guess, that I was around for. Nothing too surprising.
No, yeah, that makes perfect sense. What would you say, like, once you really started to cope with, not having your mom as a part of your life, did you notice any, like, obvious changes when it comes to, your actions or your traditions or just kind of things like that?
I think it kind of started to happen right away, just being more aware of other people's personal circumstances. For example, like before that, we'd be typical teenagers. We'd be like, oh, my mom is so annoying. She's making me come home, or I'm grounded because I did this. And it's like, after that happened, I'm like, I'd honestly give to have my mom ground me because I talked back. You kind of realize that other people take their parents for granted when they don't realize it until it's gone. Like I didn't realize it until it was gone. And you just kind of, for me, I just take into consideration other people's like things that they're going through. It makes me definitely more aware that not everything that you see is what it seems to be, that there could be another story behind it.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you bring up. And I think especially when it comes to things like death and grief and things that aren't really the norm in society to talk about, people have a tendency to like, especially on social media, to only talk about like the good things. And I'm like, yeah, the good things are great, but like, let's be honest and let's be real about what is actually going on here. So did you notice like, I don't know, like you becoming maybe more introverted or extroverted? I mean, obviously, okay, let me rephrase that. I don't think that made sense. So you like, would cope with not having your mom by, spending more time with your grandma. But when it comes time to like traditions or just everyday life, like, did you notice kind of that dynamic of the relationship just being more, like friendly, or did you see any relationships in your life become more mother-daughter like?
I guess it was just more mother-daughter like with my grandma. I myself, I guess, became more extroverted. I became loud and boisterous. I dressed crazy because I wanted attention, I guess. I acted just like I was super happy and that I was loving life and whatever. But I definitely turned to my grandma a lot more as like a mother figure.
That's so funny. Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. And I feel like just with a family, that's where, obviously, if you're close to your family, I'm not going to say all family, but if you have like a decently close relationship to a female in your family, those relationships are probably more likely to become, more mother-daughter relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you, like, as you started to really cope and grieve with, that realization of like not having your mom to spend life with, did you notice the dynamics of any other relationships in your life change?
I guess it's just kind of like a broad question. I noticed that my dad wasn't like, I don't know. I guess like my dad probably was nervous to kind of show me how he really felt and show us kids in general. Like, and I can understand being a parent, you don't want your children to see you go through pain and be sad because then it makes them sad. So I think that he definitely pushed down his actual feelings for sure. And in turn, it just kind of distanced us a little bit as I got older and more into the teenage years. So we didn't do things together. I spent a lot of time in my room as like, I guess, I'm not sure if that's for every teenager, but for me, I was always in my bedroom. I didn't want to hang out with my family. I just would text with my friends and listen to music. That's really all I did all the time. So I guess like between that and my brother, I just was like angsty.
Yeah, no, I definitely can relate to that. So tell me a bit more. You said that you lived in like a small like village. I'm very curious how, that's kind of a side note, how did that like affect your grief?
It definitely kind of sucked. I spent a lot of time alone. And usually every weekend I would go and stay with my friends in the neighboring town, which was about a half an hour away. And that was really the only time besides school I got to see any of my other friends because of the small town. The only other friend I really had was, she lived across the street from me, but she was 5 years younger than me. So she was just a kid too, as I was going through all of this. So for the most part, I'd hang out by myself at the hockey rink and just sit at the park and not really kind of do much.
Oh boy, I'm sorry. That sounds so rough.
Yeah. So, and then on the weekends, I'd honestly just hang out with my friends in a neighboring town. And I'm honestly like surprised that my father let me do that. And he trusted me enough to let me go away for the weekends. And then I'd usually come home and do stuff at home. But that was really the only time I got to kind of hang out with anybody besides my family.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I mean, thankfully the neighboring town, 30 minutes is pretty far, but at least it wasn't like 3 hours away. I'd be like, okay, this is really in the middle of BFE if the neighboring town is this far away. Yeah, you were saying with your neighbor, she was just, I was like, she was 10 when your mom passed. So definitely pretty young. Definitely probably could not relate to you on that level, regardless of her age. But I'm sure the age, definitely made a difference. So do you still, I guess, kind of going back to, your relationship with your grandma, do you, if, she's alive or even if she's deceased, do you have the relationship with somebody else? Like, I guess, do you continue to cope with, not having your mom to share life with in the same way that you did?
I definitely used to. Until 2 years ago, my grandma did pass away actually on the same day that my mother had passed away.
Oh, God. Bless you.
And that was like, it just brought all of these feelings back. And it was just so evil because like a week and some few days before that, her dad had passed away. She passed away in her sleep. And it was just like a lot at once. And ever since then, I really honestly don't have a lot of people to go to. Like, I have my mother-in-law, which she's definitely great to go to if I want to, but it's almost like it's the whole process all over again from when I was 15, where, I don't want anybody to ever replace my mom. And then it just like brings back all of these anger feelings where it's like, no, like I don't want this. But then at the same time, I have to tell myself, not to be angry that somebody's trying to have a relationship with you. And it just so happens that she's a mother, and you kind of just can't be mad at her for wanting to help you through these things because you don't have your mom. So it's like all of these angsty feelings coming back, and then I have to be like, cool your jets. It's not the end of the world that you have a mother-in-law that wants to have a good relationship with you. So it's almost like I try to self-sabotage any potential mothering figure because I didn't choose it,
No, yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's especially too, okay, you lose one mother figure, aka your mom, and then, okay, I'm choosing to have another mother figure with somebody, and they die, and you're like, well, shit, like, there goes two mother figures in, X amount of time. And people try, and it's so, so hard when people are like doing things out of the kindness of their heart, but they're doing things that you don't want them to do, and they only mean well. Yeah. It's like, I don't know how to tell you that I don't want this. Like, and bless your heart. I feel like, if your mom had like, well, I'm not saying she didn't have a best friend because that's going to sound really, really bad. But I know if there's somebody who maybe grew up with your mom, and I really value that just like in my own personal life, because those people like sometimes know you better than your family does. So is there like, do you find yourself, well, I take that back. Why do you think that you found yourself wanting a mother figure when your mom passed, but not after your grandma passed?
I don't know, I guess because I essentially am tired of putting my trust in people and just to lose them. I guess in a sense, like I just feel like anybody that I love just leaves me.
Yeah, no, I definitely makes sense. And it's sad too, but it's also kind of, I don't even know what the right word is. Like riveting, encouraging that like at the end, it really just goes to show that at the end of the day, you have yourself. And yeah, it sucks. Like, yourself is enough. Like, when you just keep getting, eventually, like, it's sad if you're used to losing people. I mean, that's really, really, really unfortunate. But it's like, okay, like, I really cannot rely on somebody else to help me get through this. So I'm going to either have to figure it out myself or get help from somebody who might not like be close to me, who might just be like a random person or, whatever. And then figure out how to handle it myself. So eventually, like, I just rely on myself. Does that make sense, or am I rambling?
No, that makes sense, because that's one thing I learned too when I was in the hospital, that you can really only rely on yourself. Truly, you can't change anybody but yourself. You can't control what anybody else does, but the only person that you can control is yourself. So it's just, unfortunately, a harsh reality. You just can only rely on yourself.
Yeah, I mean, that's all there really is to it. But once you realize that, like, you can get through this on your own, you're like, dang, I'm a badass. Like,
yeah,
okay, like, life is pretty great, that kind of thing. But
yeah,
in the moment, it's really sucky and it's hard, because it's like, especially when you see other people, they're like, oh, well, they have their moms to help them, or, oh God, it's like literally comparison is the actual theft of all joy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, it's just, I mean, it's hard not to get discouraged, but eventually it just becomes an easier part of life and grief, because that's just how grief works.
Yeah.
Like, how is it telling that person? I believe you said it was your mother-in-law, right? Mm-hmm. How, like, did you tell her that, like, you didn't want a mother figure? I'm curious about how that went.
No, I didn't tell her, and I know that she herself treads really thin too, I think, just because she doesn't want to upset me. And I appreciate her, but I do kind of just like have pretty strict boundaries, I guess, when it comes to stuff like that. But I haven't really like told her. It's just, I guess, something that I don't really talk about besides to, I guess, my significant other. I just explained to him that, I have a hard time trusting other women who potentially could be like, I guess, a good influence or a good person to be there for me. I just have a really hard time doing it. So I think that she just understands that and just kind of is pretty good about giving me my space and not trying to, overstep boundaries, which I know that some mother-in-laws definitely do.
Oh yeah, I mean, you lucked out there. Yeah. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
I could go into a whole other episode about boundaries. Ugh. Those are hard. They're hard just in life in general. And then you put grief on top of it and you're like, oh God, this is going to be really good or really, really bad.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes me feel better, because I can totally attest to that though. Like, not really trusting other women, because I look back on it now and I'm like, I don't really have any women in my life that are like a role model. I mean, I have my mom's best friend, but they've been best friends since she was 21. So like, that's just kind of expected. But especially in my family, like in my immediate family, no, it's interesting. I'd have to like really think about like why that is the case for so many women that have lost a mom. I mean, I'm sure it's different for everybody, but when you really like not look into it, I guess when you really like dissect it, it's like it all kind of comes from the same thing, like AKA losing your mom. So yeah, it's just interesting. But I'm glad that you at least were able to have that, relationship with your grandma, but do you find yourself like, since you at least don't really have that woman in your life, that sounds really bad, but since you don't have like, a motherly figure in your life, do you find yourself like kind of keeping in your grief? Or do you just tell other people that aren't women?
Yeah, I guess I mostly just kind of rely on my significant other a lot more now. I just try to communicate like a lot with him about how I'm feeling, and it really just kind of, I don't know, it's almost like when my grandma passed away that I was mourning the loss of a mother again, because like even to this day, like my heart just aches because I miss her, and I know exactly how my dad feels, and it aches because I feel for my dad and my uncle because they had to lose their mom, and I just feel like all of this stuff coming up again because of this loss, and I just am trying to not let it take over. But it's like if I suppress it, then it comes out in other ways, like anxiety. When, for example, like just talking about my family here on this, I'm all of a sudden in my mind, I'm thinking like, oh my God, are they going to get mad at me when they listen to this? Like, are they, maybe they didn't know that this is how I felt, or I just am like anxious thinking that everybody's going to take it personally. And I just always have to tell myself that I'm allowed to feel this way and it'll all be okay. But at the same time, it feels like the only person that I can really confide in is my significant other. Like I have a best friend, but she has her own life now. She has a boyfriend, and we're not exactly the best at communicating, I guess. We don't really hang out. And I feel like, again, I trusted her, and she isn't necessarily there when I would like her to be,
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
I guess maybe I put too much pressure on her because of not having a mother figure. Maybe I was projecting it on her. Like I'm not really sure, and I guess now I'm just kind of realizing that that's maybe why I had such high expectations out of our relationship.
Oh yeah, and it's literally like most of the time I notice it's so unintentional. You're like, oh, like I didn't mean to like put you on a pedestal, or I didn't mean to expect this much out of you, but it's just kind of second nature, it's kind of part of life. But wow, I'm so glad that you have like a good relationship, obviously from what you tell me, with your significant other, because that is so important. And like when you were saying communicating that, I'm literally helping somebody like right now, one of my clients, she's like, I need help communicating my feelings to my significant other. And I mean, communication is key, but especially when you're grieving, and it's so hard because you don't know how to communicate your feelings because you're like, how the heck am I feeling? But it's like, okay, you need to communicate that you don't know how you're feeling, because people don't get that. It's hard. But that's so funny. And I think it really just goes to show too, like the importance of creating space for people where they can talk about their grief. And you are absolutely 100% allowed to, I think you said like, I'm allowed to feel this way, or I'm allowed to think about myself. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I just said that I'm allowed to feel like my feelings.
Yes, you are 100% allowed to feel your feelings. Like that's honest to God, the only way that you are going to grieve, and the only way that you are going to like get through this nonsense. Like 100% without a doubt. So that's like where space comes into play. It's like you have the space for people where they are allowed to grieve, because if they don't, and if they bottle it up, like you might not, like you might think it's okay, but eventually it'll literally come back to bite you in the ass. And you are going to hit your breaking point, and it's so, so sad. But that's why it's so like, yeah, I'm glad that you realize that, at least from, what you're telling me.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to leave with the listeners about, I guess, coping with, not having your mom? Oh, I take that back. Wow, this is going to be fun editing. What advice would you have to someone who is really struggling with the concept of not having their mom to share life with?
That I guess it's okay to feel the way you feel and to reach out to others. Like, I guess for me, I just projected it more on my friends and my grandma and then at times myself too, but it didn't end well for me just suppressing it. Like, I ended up wanting to end my life and things like this. But in reality, if you just can find somebody, even if it's your significant other, somebody just to listen for you to be able to kind of work things out and just communicate with, talk to, it does get easier. And as long as you have boundaries, you can have relationships with other people, to like your mother-in-laws or your father-in-laws or even your dad. Like, I have a pretty open relationship with my dad, and I've had to have a pretty open relationship with him since I was 15, and going through my body changing phase that I had to provide my dad for. So I don't know, just find somebody that you can talk to and don't keep it to yourself, because it just bites you in the ass.
Yep. Okay. I'm so glad. Hopefully, if that's not hammered into somebody's head after this episode, they'll just keep listening to it and keep listening to it, because you literally just cannot say it enough. It's so, so, so important. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This was so much fun.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, friend. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Before you go, I have 4 favors to ask you. First, I wanted to let you know that I host a group for women where we share our day-to-day stories, challenges, and victories. If you want to come along for the ride, head to Facebook and search for the Life After Losing Mom community. Second, if you don't mind leaving me a review and telling me how I've helped you in your grief journey, I would greatly appreciate it. Third, head to Katbonner.com/podcast to access previous episodes and subscribe for episodes in the future. Finally, head to Katbonner.com to schedule a complimentary connection call with me. I'd love to know more about your grief journey. Always remember that despite losing our mothers, we have flourishing futures.
This has been an OutsourceYourPodcast.com production.